Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And today we're talking about Bruckner. Yeah, Bruckner. You know the guy. Big, long symphonies with like blocky, strange forms with lots of brass chorales. And he seems to be very popular now because, like, people were waiting for the next German composer to be able to promote like crazy. And there was poor old Bruckner standing all the way at the end of the line, but we finally got to him. And so now he's got an anniversary coming up this year. It's 2024, right? It's the something anniversary of, yes, he was born in 1824. So it's his bicentennial. And that means that there's going to be endless quantities of Bruckner flying out all over the place. And it really makes no sense at all because he didn't write enough to justify that kind of attention. I mean, there could be discoveries in a lot of earlier music that he wrote before the symphonies, because there's a ton of music he wrote before Symphony No. 1 popped out. But he actually wasn't really much of a good composer until Symphony No. 1 popped out. He was ordinary. And then, I don't know, something happened. He had some sort of religious revelation, or he banged into Wagner, or I don't know, whatever happened, he became a remarkably individual symphonist. And the symphony that most people encounter is Symphony No. 4. This one, the Romantic. And the reference recording, Karl Böhm and the Vienna Philharmonic. That's the one. It was actually published in 1974. It came rather late to the party. There were plenty of others. There was Klemper's, which was wonderful, and then Joachim did it a few times, and they were very good. His Berlin one is outstandingly fine. But, we wanted one that would really become a reference, and it, as much as Böhm did a wonderful job in the piece, and he did. It's as much a credit to the Vienna Philharmonic, because Bruckner is a quintessentially Viennese composer. I don't know what that means, but he is. I mean, there isn't anybody in like Chicago who was doing what Bruckner was doing, so that makes him Viennese. And this was one of those performances that you listened to it with the Vienna Phil, and it didn't sound like any other orchestra. It really did. The prominence of the horns in the brass section, for example, those plaintive oboes, plaintive with a V, plaintive is like a lawsuit, the plaintive oboes. Yeah, it was an extraordinary performance. And what made it even more extraordinary, and this is a funny fact, it really is, it was issued on 4 LP sides as 2 records in a box. And I couldn't afford it. I remember I didn't hear it because I couldn't afford it. It was expensive. I mean, it was 2 full-price LPs. And, that also led to the impression that this was a performance of unusual and extraordinary slowness, which it really isn't. It's not. I mean, it's on the stately side, granted, but we all know that Bruckner sounds better the slower you play it. And that was until, Remy Ballet or whatever that guy's name came along in Gramola and out Celibidache to prove that slow can be lethal. Yes, it can be. But most of the time, I mean, Bruckner doesn't, let's put it this way, let's do it the other way. Bruckner doesn't need to be played quickly. It doesn't have to be fast. So this performance breathed. It had lyricism and breadth, and the Vienna Philharmonic sounded like no other orchestra in that music. And that gave this performance the distinctiveness that a reference recording really should have, or that helps to make it a reference recording. Let's put it that way. And the other thing that made it rather interesting is that, Karl Böhm did not do a tremendous amount of recording for Decca. There was some. I mean, his major label was Deutsche Grammophon. And he did some EMI stuff too. I mean, he was sort of all over the place, but he was not known as a Bruckner conductor. He was a Mozart and Strauss guy. And his Bruckner was rather limited. He did in this set the 3rd and the 4th, right? And then he did the 7th and the 8th. And I think that was about it for Bruckner with him. He did the 7th on Deutsche Grammophon and the 8th on Deutsche Grammophon with cuts, interestingly enough. He did a sort of cut version of the finale. So his Bruckner was not the kind of Bruckner that Bruckner kookies, the Bruckner cult, immediately fell in with. He was not a Bruckner conductor that was looked upon as a bona fide member of the squad. And I actually think that helped this recording. It really did, because Böhm had his reputation independently of being a Bruckner specialist. So he was not looked upon with suspicion by normal people who thought that all those Bruckner people were absolutely loony, and their with their little stable of conductors who did very little else that anybody knew about or cared about. That was a problem with Eugen Joachim, for example, who was a fabulous conductor in all kinds of music, but whose specialization in Bruckner, I think, in a way, counted against him a little bit. Because you have to remember, in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s or whatever, Bruckner was not anything like as ubiquitous. I'm not going to say popular, because I still don't think he's very popular, but he was not as ubiquitous on disc as he has since become. I mean, nowadays everything is ubiquitous on disc, isn't it? So to be a Bruckner person, normal people like myself at the time, we dipped our toes in gingerly. And at the same time that this was around, Karajan, of course, was doing Bruckner. He was doing his best to promote Bruckner, to prove that he was the ultimate in German conducting. And his Bruckner Fourth was never that great. I mean, it had its fans, but the trouble with Karajan and his Bruckner generally is that he liked that thick legato kind of sound. And the brass playing in particular had so little timbral differentiation compared to Vienna. I mean, listen to the scherzo of Karajan's Bruckner Fourth, where you don't hear the horn triplets, where you don't hear, it all just congeals into this, where there's stuff happening, da 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 da, the triplet rhythms and stuff. It all just, you don't hear them, quite simply. The string tremolos are all too loud. They drown everything out. It's really kind of fascinating when you compare the two, because then you hear Böhm, and all of a sudden the sonority is unpacked. And you hear horns and trumpets and trombones and woodwinds, and the strings are luscious when they sing, a melody, but they also have transparency where they need to, and intensity, even at low dynamic levels. It's really quite extraordinary what Böhm and Vienna achieved in this performance, and how different it was from what we were being sold as the standard Germanic sound. And I always got the sense with Karajan and Bruckner, even though he loved Bruckner, no question about it. I mean, his eighth was extraordinary. I saw it live. He did some amazing things, but with Vienna, not with Berlin. You got a sense that, Karajan did Bruckner as a charity, because he had to, not so much because he wanted to, although we know he wanted to. That's not kind, but the impression overall was that this was not a major effort on Karajan's part until we got to the end of his life, and he did those remakes in Vienna. So the Böhm Bruckner Fourth had its really, really special qualities that made it stand out. And I think that as a result of that, it became, by default almost, the reference recording, because there was no complete Bruckner cycle by the Vienna Philharmonic at the time. I mean, with one conductor. Remember, Eloquence, finally, Australian Eloquence, released a Bruckner box with the Vienna Phil doing all the symphonies. But they were catch as catch can. There was Zubin-Mehta doing the ninth. Horst Stein did a couple of them splendidly. There was Lauren Moselle doing the fifth. Schulte, his early recordings of like numbers 7 and 8 or something like that. And then Claudio Abbado did some stuff, some of the early ones, but they were not a unified group. And Böhm did 3 and 4 in what became that cycle. And so this fourth is the version de référence, the reference recording for Bruckner's Fourth, and it deserves to be, because it has those wonderful, unique qualities, and it's not slow and dull. It really isn't, although it's not like short and zippy. It lasts, about a good hour. Let's see, 20, 40, plus 26, 66 minutes. It does take its time. I guess it does, but it's absolutely lovely and magnificent, and it's a recording for the ages, no question about it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.